Hey guys, I researched around and decided what to prepare for Brel. This video will share how I brainstorm things personally before preparing for a raid or make decisions on builds. It's definitely not the best way to make decisions, but I've always been doing this way for all my characters ever since I started LOSTARK. It's actually my first time sharing this, so if you happen to like it, let me know, and maybe I can have more of these sessions for all my other characters too. Just remember, take the information as a grain of salt, and always do your own research and find what is ultimately fun for you. That always yields better results, especially when trying out for new raids. Let's get to it right away. Let's go over the blue Gunlancer starting from evolution. The most popular build is the crit stacked build. Spec crit, keen sense, limit break, and full force smite and tier 2 and 3. And obviously the stand up fighting for tier 4, very straightforward. On the alignment tab, people are using tier 4 as level 2, and side notes, one each for extra crit rate and attack speed with front dashes. The leap tab came out recently. The T skill uses a lot of mana, and cast time is pretty slow. So most use unleashed power for damage, potential release for CDR, and immediate cast for cast speed and less mana cost. Basically, Gunlancer's awakening is often used for utility, so not many people use points for hyper awakenings. Elixir is also straightforward. You get master, but if you have critical, you just have less efficiency. I recently cut master myself. Bracelet is also straightforward, spec and crit, and if you have any crit based lines, it's also a big plus. For engravings, we have Grudge, Adrenaline, Barricade, and Stabilized Status, and you have a choice between Cursed Dull or Keen Blunt. And the reason why Keen Blunt can work is you can get over 80% crit rate with Blue Gunlancer now with this build. Let's go over skills. Rune choices are preferences, but I've noticed when Rage procs with Shout, it's really nice with fast animations. Some players use Stinger or Surge Cannon instead of Nella, but the speed is so goddamn awful and I personally like Nella, so this is probably the skill set I would use. The new T-skill Shield Charge is a simple dash attack that does massive damage when it's landed on the head. The cooldown is 41 seconds with the leap points too. The cycle is super simple too. You have Shout, Shield Bash, T-skill, Guardian, Leap, Charge, and then Shield Shock afterwards. And you use whatever off cooldown and most important, so you have T-skill, Guardian, Leap, and Charge. And sometimes when you're using Shield Shock, your quick recharge rune procs, and that's gonna help you rotate skills faster. So one thing I wanted to look a little deeper is the leap attack. The reason why I tested this is because we don't need bash anymore. Now that bash grouping isn't mandatory, you have more options now. As you can see here, the 2-3-1 is the most damage still, but it requires you to rotate it pretty often due to fast cooldown. With addition to T skill, since we rotate a lot more skills too, I often saw myself syncing cooldowns with other skills, where multiple skills were off cooldown while I'm in leap attack animation. This was very stress inducing. From testing and rotating skills a few times and trying different things, I think 1-3-1 or 1-3-2 is very comfortable out of all the combinations. Again, this is because we don't have to group things with bash. The cooldown differences aren't that big, and they're not at the same either to have one playing around. It is also longer to hopefully get more advantages from quick recharge rune for shield shock. The 1-3-1 has more concise animation, able to be spacebar cancelled at the second line quickly. 1-3-2 has few frames slower, but it's only 2 ticks and it's funnier. Also, I would definitely use 1-3-2 if you're able to jump over the boss, but one thing I don't know is you jump so high but you can't go over the boss. If it did, I would have definitely used 1-3-2 instead, because you could get to head position really quickly. Okay, let's go over red now. So red is the same thing. Stats are distributed to yield around 90% crit rate. As for tier 2 and 3, the forbidden spell node makes red use less mana, but this does not impact bleed or any skills that use mana like awakenings. Strike is the new entropy for arc passive, where you're not forced to do front or back attack, but you still get the crit rate and crit damage benefit. However though, since doing a head attack yields more damage, red Gunlancer still needs to have a high accuracy in head attacks, especially for surge and stingers. 4th tier, most people use Mana Forge. Some do use Blunt Spike, but being capped at 80% crit rate is actually really awful considering red Gunlancer's crit is super important. So it is definitely an option, but I don't really recommend it. For Enlightenment, you have level 2 T4 for good damage increase, and side notes for damage and front dash. You do get the minus 80% shield amount from Nella, but this is only for teammates, and Nella is often used for DR and cleanses anyway, so this is still fine. One thing you need to make sure is you need to be in Z state before doing damage to get the 16% damage benefit. With T4 enabled, you can walk pretty fast with Z on, and your shield management is overall super easy compared to the old one. Leap is pretty much the same for red Gunlancer, but some people level up immediate cast to full because the cast time of red's T skill is very long. And Elixir and Bracelet is straightforward. And as for engravings, we have Grudge, Supercharge, and Master of Combat. And you will need to pick 2 from Barricade, Crystal, Stabilized Status, or Adrenaline. As for Adrenaline though, I don't quite recommend it, but I do see red Gunlancers use it. What you just need to do is you need to adjust your crit rate stats to more Swift so that you have higher speed and all these things together. But after I tried it a couple of times, I don't really see the advantage for this other than swiftier playstyle. You do reach max attack and movement speed, so either way, this is more of a preference range, but this is something that doesn't work for me. Going over skills, so a popular thing most people are doing right now is they started taking more quick recharge runes. The reason being is to try to lower cooldowns for T skills, Surge, and Stinger. Since Dagger is sufficient already for red Gunlancer, most people put them on Bash, Counter Gunlance, or even Taunt. For people who like Bleed and Poison runes, they do put them on Bash and Gunlance Shot as well. A lot of people stopped putting CJ on Gunlance Shot and Dash Upper Fire because it was difficult to match it with Surge and Stinger. Instead, for Gunlance Shot, a lot more people started putting Bleed or Gale Winds to have faster animation to aim all ticks to the head. One thing that is really disappointing is T-Skill is not a charge skill, but it still does have a decent amount of damage if RL landed on the head. As for optional skills, it's the same as Season 2 for Synergy. Bash, you have the Shield Bash, and then you have Shield Shock. They all have strengths and weaknesses. As for optional skills for Nella, they serve a different purpose, and this is quite new for Season 3. Going over the optional skills in detail, some started try using Rising Spear. This adds another dash to the kit. Its purpose to help your accuracy on head attacks, and since it's quick on cooldown, they put quick recharge rune here too. Shield Charge, you're not using this for synergy, but for mobility and 3-hit tick to activate Judgment. So Conviction will be on Dash Upper Fire, and Judgment on Shield Charge. Only rough point as both skills are 3 hits only, because the first tripod on the third roll is actually a 2-hit instead of 4, even though the tick is doubled. I don't know if it's a bug, but it's a little bit weird. So for these two together, using them as mobility, this is actually pretty cool because you lock your Shield Bash, and after you rotate your skills regularly, by the second time you rotate your Spear Shot, you can check to see if your Conviction activates from Dash Upper Fire, and if you see Conviction, you can try activating Judgment, and if it succeeds, you have enough time to rotate Surge, Stinger, and T-Skill, and possibly Gunlance Shot if you do it fast enough. Since this skill replaces Nella, you're often locking this skill or using it as just additional mobility. And the only bad thing is lacking number of hits, so it doesn't really have a high chance. An additional mobility skill is really good to increase your head attack accuracy. You can use them together with your front spacebar to do some cool maneuvers too. Lastly, some people take both Fire Bullet and Counter Gunlance. Some take away cooldown gems from Bash and apply damage on Fire Bullet, because it is still 100% uptime on Synergy when you're playing Red Gunlancer. Since Fire Bullet is a resetting skill, Quick Recharge Rune does really good with this skill. So going over with playstyle options, first we have the original team play one with Nella. I think I will still play Red Gunlancer with Nella if I'm playing a tough raid. But if I'm busting or doing homework raids, replacing some skills, I might play the Shield Bash build. So continuing, these are some of the most asked questions I've seen in the community too. So about Conviction and Judgment. Conviction is still equipped at Dash Upper Fire if you're using it. So more people moved on to Quick Recharge Rune Spam. But some use Judgment on skills like Shield Bash instead of Nella to control activation at will. Hence, that's why the new build started showing. And also, people started using Bleed or Gale Wind on Spear Shot now because it's not that really important to have Judgment on Spear Shot. So mana consumption. So Red Gunlancer was lacking a lot of mana in Season 2. Season 3, since we have additional nodes, High Swift requires mana food, but the original Crit Swift build doesn't have mana problems at all. And some of the Gunlancers actually use mana efficiency engraving because relic engravings are super expensive, and if relic engraving from mana efficiency engraving is pretty cheap, and if you read it up to relic, it does 15% damage and then 20% recovery, so this is going to fix the mana problem as a whole. You don't really need to buy it, but generally if you just play the Crit Swift build, you rarely lack mana as long as supports rotate, and if you do lack mana, you can just take mana food and there will be no issues. So Bleed and Poison Rune is not as popular anymore for Gunlancer, and this is because the node Forbidden Spell, it does not impact Bleed and Poison, so people started taking Bleed and Poison runes off and decided to put something like Quick Recharge to hopefully rotate their skills faster. So Quick Recharge rune skills too, this is the example. Some people use it on Bash, there's Shield Shock, there's Taunt, there's Counter Gunlance, and there's Rising Spear. They usually put on highest quick recharge on skills with low CDR or combo skills. For example, Shield Shock is actually really good because you use it twice and it procs both times. Okay, now going over red versus blue. So I'm not quite knowledgeable at calculating DPS because I don't really do it. So I usually do my own thing by basing it on cycles. I usually try to simulate a real fight environment instead of simple scarecrow hits. For example, like I always look at the actual timings, buff timings. These are super important for me, and the cycles itself need to be compressed enough to ensure you're performing enough for the team. And the questions I usually ask myself is it going to be within one actual cycle, or is it going to be within the 2 bubble cycle, or the artist's 2 bubble cycle, etc. All these things together. So in terms of test notes, I try to make it as equal as I can. Both of the builds have full level 10 T3 gem, which is level 8 at T4. I simulated T4 Yearning and Feast, which is about 14% attack speed, movement speed. No RNG runes like Rage and like Quick Recharge, and no damage runes like Bleed and Poison. No Conviction Judgment, no Awakening use, and I rotated it average about 10 times and I just recorded it myself. So the red build that I have has 92.73% crit rate, and it's the default Nella skill set, but you can't use counter Gunlance because I couldn't really rotate counter Gunlance because the Scarecrow doesn't hit you. As for blue build, I have 77.49% crit rate, and the leap attack is 131. As you can see, the total action time is about the same, which is at 10 seconds or lower. Also, if you don't land head attacks with red, the performance drops a lot as well because all of these are head attack skills. However, this is not counting counter Gunlance, and the counter Gunlance skill does significant amount of damage. It does a little more than Gunlance shot, so if you happen to land them, I would be adding maybe about 120 to 180 mil on top of this based on head attack or not. So with this, let's talk about the comparison I've seen throughout testing. First, blue Gunlancer has a slower playstyle. It is significantly slower and actually feels sluggish sometimes. You have to stay near the boss during your attacks. Your attack range is actually not that far either. Your Guardian Thunderbolt is ranged, but you need to be close enough to have both ticks hit too. Leap attack and shield charge requires you to be very near the boss the whole time as well. This is probably the biggest disadvantage that the blue Gunlancer has, because if the new raid Broshaza has a mechanic that is not damage related, like identity meters, for example something like Akan's poison meter or Echidna's charm meter, etc. Or speaking of Echidna, imagine if she's on top of her tile and that tile turns into a flower tile, so you can't be near her at all to do damage. These situations is probably when the blue Gunlancer would perform so bad. Red is definitely more versatile. Even if you charge Surge Cannon and Stingers, it technically has decent range and you can even hit and run. So the charge itself is slow, but the numbers you actually do feel a little bit faster, it's a little bit more compressed, and you don't really need to stay near the boss the whole time. So basically you can hit and run, and this is really a big thing for, like, let's say a blind run. Additionally, this category is basically the reason I wanted to play red for Theomine 2-man bus I recently did. I played blue for Theomine 2-man bus when I was near the boss the whole time for, like, let's say gate 1 and 2 and even 3. It was very stressful when you're often aggroed. No doubt blue has way better utility than red. This is because your dash upper fire can be off cooldown the whole time to react to counters. This is actually really important because for blind runs, no one really knows when the counter happens. You have to react to it, and it's really important if you have a counter ready to go, you can always just easily react to it and then hopefully land the counter to progress further. The full Nella shield is good, but higher cooldown is a little bit disappointing. This is including the taunt shouts. It's a couple seconds difference, but still, if it was shorter, it would have been much nicer. And there's also an X skill for blue Gunlancer. It also does a decent amount of damage, probably in the level of shield charge. But I think this skill is more often used as utility, and if this skill is used well, it can definitely help the team greatly during blind progressions too. As for damage, after trying out multiple times for hours, I believe you'll always have higher damage when both players are at the same skill level, unless it's one of those special raids that have meters. Blue is just so much easier with arc passive active. I don't think it's an insane amount of difference in damage though, because I didn't take account of other skill sets required to play red really well. However, with the simulated situation that I had, my red build wasn't able to have higher DPS parses even with the 100% head attack. So with some rooms of error, I feel that without counter Gunlance being into an account, the DPS feels about the same if red has 100% head attacks. So I assume you could achieve higher ceiling if you play really well with red Gunlancer still. So what's the verdict here? I'm planning to prog the new Brel Raid with blue Gunlancer. However, something that is really good for Season 3 is since it's so easy to switch builds, I have proper elixirs ready to switch red if the raid has crazy things that is really bad for blue Gunlancers, like meter related mechanics or mechanics where you need to run around a lot. I can always switch to red and then try that as well. It will only cost me silver. And since Barricade and Stabilized Status are decent in price and used on both builds, I can safely buy them for now without really choosing a build too. So I'm personally doing blue because I think the new playstyle is fun enough. And for red, I'm definitely not confident to achieve high accuracy on head attacks because there are just no information at this raid. But for buses and old raids, I would actually play red with the extra mobility skills because it looks crazy fun. So what should you guys do? This is my personal opinion. If you're a red Gunlancer player, I would stick with it until 1680 arc passive enabled, because blue is definitely worse than T3 due to bash requirement. If you're a blue player though, there's really no need to switch to red unless you want a different playstyle taste. Next, try the skill sets in Trixion. See if you like the playstyle with the skill set that I've shared. Since you can still try it in Trixion, it is very important to try out for yourself, see if you like it or not. And third one, I think this is the most important one. It's basically never too late to decide after Brel releases in Korea. We actually don't know how the Brel raid is going to be. Any raids below Brel, red Gunlancers can perform really well and blue Gunlancers can perform really well too. So you don't really need to do a change if you like this specific build. But if Brel Raid is extremely difficult for blue Gunlancers, maybe you can make a decision afterwards, but you can always check when Brel Raid comes out in Korea. Last, engravings to read. So I would focus on reading neutral ones like Barricade and Stabilized Status. Crystal and Grudge is expensive. If you do have it, it's really good. But usually when you're trying to invest on certain things, I would say after you get the honings done, like gems done, etc., I would read Barricade and Stabilized Status relics. With that, I will conclude the video here. Hope this helps to get an idea on the state of Gunlancers. Remember guys, this is all subject to change. So when it does, I'll probably make another video to note myself as well. So basically it'll be an added information to this video. Although I think this covers most of the fundamentals to keep in mind to see what the two builds deliver. And ultimately they feel about the same. I honestly think it's more of a preference, and since there are some real good red players out there that can do really well, I would definitely say stick to what you are having fun with. With that, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks guys, bye bye!